Hi guys, so I wanted to talk to you about what was on your Chapter 11 test, or not Chapter 11 test, sorry, your Chapter 6 test. We're not quite that far yet. So your Chapter 6 test has actually 3 free response questions. The first one tells you that you have a normal distribution with some mean and some standard deviation. And it says, what would the expected difference be in their scores between two different groups, right? So once again, what would be their difference in the scores? And then what would the standard deviation of the differences be? So if you're thinking about those two questions, the mean and standard deviation, it's when you're doing the difference of two distributions. And we talked about the transformations of distributions a little bit more when we were doing, I think 6.2 day 2. So you might want to check that out. And then it says find the probability that the difference is greater than 6. So you're going to have to do a probability calculation of the mean differences, but remember you need to use the mean and standard deviation of the differences from parts A and B, not the originals, right? So once again, if you're talking about the differences, you need to use the mean and standard deviation of the differences. The second free response question gives you a probability distribution. So remember, that's where they give you something like this with all your x values and their probabilities, right? And then it says find the mean or the expected value of x. So we have done that before. We talked about how to do that in 6.1 day 1. And then it tells you to find and interpret the standard deviation of that probability distribution. So remember, you have to find the differences between x and the mean, you square them, and then you multiply them by their probabilities, and then you add them up. I would strongly suggest just doing the table again. So like writing a table out like this. So from 6.1 day 2, this is a great practice. Expected value, find your standard deviation, right? And then part C is going to ask you to do some transformations. So if you were looking at doing transformations of those variables, once again, we talked about transformations with 6.2 day 1. So what happens to mean if we multiply by something? Well, it actually gets multiplied. And then standard deviation, remember, you can multiply things to get your new standard deviation, but addition and subtraction only affects the mean. Because if you're talking about spread, if I add something to everything, all I'm doing is sliding it around. I'm not changing how far spread out I am, right? The third free response question talks about, they give you a situation, and it says, to find a whole bunch of probabilities. So part A and B, one of them is going to be asking about a binomial question and one is going to be asking about a geometric question. So remember the difference between the two. Binomial means that you have a set sample size, right? And then geometric means you go until you get that success or failure. So you will have to know the difference between the two, right? And then you'll have to do a calculation from both. And yes, you can use your calculator for those, but make sure that you're labeling like the n, the p, and the x, and using probability notation. And then part C from that question, so the third free response question, asks about, do we have enough evidence? So remember, this is a nice throwback question to what we've learned in previous chapters. Remember, if there's a really small chance of something occurring, then we might have evidence to prove that the original number was incorrect, that we might be onto something, right? So our data was rare enough to say, hey, maybe they're wrong and I'm right? So that would be your third free response question. And looking at the multiple choice, there's 10 problems here. So first of all, the first question gives you a probability distribution. So remember, that's just like looking at something like this, right? And it says, what's the probability of getting at least 2? So you can just add up everything 2 and beyond. The second multiple choice question is asking you to figure out the probability of x is less than a certain number, right? So what you're going to need to do, it's kind of a weird question, so maybe I should just write this down. So if I were to give you like 0, 1, 2, 3, here's my x values, and then I had like 2x, 3x, 5x, and 7x were constant. Okay, so you're going to see a probability distribution, but instead of them giving you probabilities, they're giving you like the proportion of the total that everything is. So in this case, if you look at this distribution, I have, actually, let's just make this a 10 to make our lives easier. Okay, so you have to figure out if this is 10, 5, 3, and 2, there's a total of 20 x's there, right? And we know every probability distribution has to add up to 1. So you can figure out that x is equal to 1/20th, right? And then that can help you figure out each one of those individual probabilities, right? So I'd have 2 out of 20, 3 out of 20, 5 out of 20, and 10 out of 20, right? And basically it's just saying how much weight does each x value have, and then you have to work backwards and figure out what's the probability of each, right? Once you have those probabilities, calculating is pretty simple. The third multiple choice question asks you about expected profit. So it's just the expected value, so average. So once again, you take your x values times their individual probabilities, add them up. And then you have a question that's talking about rolling a dice. And then you have to use the appropriate formula from your formula sheet. Remember how it had the n and k in parentheses, and then p to the k, and then 1 minus p to the n minus k. So you're going to have to actually put your answer in the handwritten form, and there's going to be 5 different options, and you have to pick out which one was written properly. So I'm trying to go back here. So it was this formula here. You'll have to pick out which one of these actually was written, which one of the answers was written appropriately using this type of idea. Remember though, the NCR is like N and K here. Okay, so that's the fourth one. The fifth multiple choice you're going to see is talking about which of the following is true. So more than likely, I'll just curve this test by 2 points. It's a tricky question, but it's all about transformations of these distributions, or talking about combining distributions. So that would be good stuff to just make sure you look over again. The sixth multiple choice question gives you normality, and it asks what's the probability that x is greater than blah, right? So if you have normal distribution and you're looking for a probability of an area under the curve, you can use norm CDF. Number 7, they're giving you a story and you have to decide if it is binomial or geometric, and then the evidence, does it match which distribution that you're talking about, right? Okay. And then number 8, it talks about, it gives you a percentage and then a sample size, and then you're going to have to figure out the mean and standard deviation from there. So you might want to look at your formulas for mean and standard deviation, and you'll have to think about, is it like a binomial distribution, right? Or is it something that you have to calculate by calculation 3.1? So you might want to check to see if it's binomial, and if it is, mean and standard deviation, you can just follow the formulas on your formula sheet. Number 9 multiple choice is which of the following is true. So like I said, I'm probably going to curve this test by 2 points because the which of the following are true are kind of cruel questions. But a lot of it is talking about the differences between binomial and geometric distributions. So really just study bits and bins and make sure you know the ins and outs of the differences there. And then the shapes of both distributions, like which one do we know is skewed right, which one has a set sample size. So yeah. And then number 10 asks you to find, they have 3 different situations, and you're going to be combining 3 distributions. So you're going to have to find the mean of those 3 combined distributions, and then you're going to have to find the standard deviation of those 3 combined distributions. So once again, combining distributions, that was in 6.2, I believe, and 6.2, I believe. Yep, so you'll want to look through that, and then that's it. I think it'll be a good one.